Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Talking, thinking, location, Red Keep. He sat alongside his wife, Elia, in the practically empty throne room. The only people who were in the throne room with them were King Aerys II, his father Queen Risiella, his mother, and 6 of the 7 Kingsguard. His little brother, Viserys, was a babe asleep in the queen's arms. His daughter, Rhaenyra, had been asleep when they were called to the throne room, so she was left in her room with her septa. "Father, why are we here?" he asked the king, looking up at him. "Elia should be resting." His wife gave him a look and a smile. "Just because I'm pregnant does not mean that I've suddenly become weak and frail," she told him. He knew that she was poking slight fun at him, but her health was frail. She had been a babe for weeks after giving birth to Rhaenys, and that was barely 2 years ago. Now she was pregnant with their second child. "We are here because one of my Kingsguard has something he wishes to tell us," the king said for all to hear. The doors to the throne room opened, and the Kingsguard in question came through those doors. "Rhaegar," observed the man, walking towards them. Brandon Stark was tall and handsome, as well as having the classical Stark look. He could admit that. The man also had the, Rhaegar would say, dubious honor of being the first Kingsguard to not be a knight and be from the north. It had only been a year since the defiance of Duskendale, and songs were already being sung throughout the 7 kingdoms about it. They sang about how, in only 2 weeks since the defiance began, Brandon Stark broke into the prison that held the king and took him to safety away from Duskendale. They sang about after Duskendale had been taken by the hand of the king. When the king had declared that he would grant whatever reward Stark wanted, he got onto his knees and asked to take the place of Ser Gaunt, becoming one of the Kingsguard, and the king accepted his request. The problem was that Brandon was the firstborn son of Rickard Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, and they had not heard his reaction to what the king had done. "My king, I have received a raven earlier today from my father, Lord Rickard Stark," the man said as he took a knee before the king. "And what does my Warden of the North have to say to his son?" The king asked, "Does he finally send word of congratulations for your position?" "No, your grace. In truth, he does not write for himself. He has said in his message that the ghost of the North has ordered Prince Rhaegar and Princess Elia to come to him in the North." "And why has it taken you since morning to bring the king this message?" Ser Gerold Hightower, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, asked him. "I have spent the day making the preparations for the trip, Lord Commander," he answered. "So you would have us travel up to the north because of some man your father knows commanded it?" he asked with a smile. "You're quite loyal to family, Brandon." He didn't look at her when she said those words. "With your approval, your grace, your son and his wife can begin their journey to the north," he said to King Aerys. "And who would go with them to protect them?" the king asked. "Ser Dane and I, along with a small number of soldiers," he answered. "Rhaegar Dane and I, along with a small number of soldiers," he answered. Rhaegar silently approved of the decision. Arthur was his closest friend, while Brandon knew the North well. His father didn't say a word for what felt like a long time. Rhaegar felt nervous as the silence went on. Even though it didn't look or feel like the defiance had changed the king, he couldn't help but think that something was different about his father, aside from what he had already done. "Very well. They shall go," he finally declared. "Hold on. You expect us to go to the north just because someone has ordered us to come?" he asked, once again getting the attention of everyone there. "I thought that the royal family answers to no one." "Do you not know your history, woman?" the king asked her, swinging his head to face her. There was a dangerous glint to his eyes, silently telling her to remember her place. "House Targaryen does answer to the ghost. What he says, we obey." "Forgive her, father," Rhaegar told him, interceding himself into the conversation. "But I had thought the ghost would not speak to us after great-grandfather had faltered." According to the family history, Akenfok had been warned by both Bloodraven and the ghost to be firm when coming to his children, but he faltered with his firstborn. The end result was Duncan the Small giving up his right to the crown for his love, leaving Jaehaerys, the second son and his grandfather, to become first in line to the Iron Throne. "Nevertheless, he has summoned you and you will go," he commanded. His son could only nod in acknowledgement. Sometimes he had forgotten that his father had abandoned the 7 after the defiance. He was more inclined to pray in the Godswood than the Sept, especially after what happened with the Red Priestess. 2 weeks later, he, his pregnant wife, the 2 Kingsguard, and the small company of soldiers were on the road to the north. It was a long journey, and there just as many nights spent at inns and taverns as there was spent around a campfire. This was such a night. They had crossed the Twins and were south of the Neck. Rhaegar, Arthur, and Brandon sat around one of the fires while Aelia slept in a tent. The prince looked over at where she slept. "She's fine, Rhaegar," Arthur told him, having noticed where he was looking. "He's right, Your Highness," Brandon said in agreement. "I know you fear that the North will hazardous to Princess Aelia's health, but the hot springs will beneficial to her." The Stark in his father's Kingsguard was not wearing his full armor. Instead, he only wore chainmail and boiled leather, which was partially hidden underneath his white cloak. "I hope you are right, Brandon." He had almost lost her when Rhaenys had been born, and traveling, while this far along pregnant, could not be good for her. She wouldn't want you to worry about her well-being. The Sword of the Morning reminded him. "She's my lady wife, Arthur," he replied. "I cannot help but be worried for her." "Her or your prophecy?" asked Brandon, making the other 2 fall silent. It was no secret amongst the Kingsguard and the royal family that Rhaegar believed in a prophecy that spoke of a prince that was promised, and for it to come to pass, there had to be 3 heads of the dragon. But just because he believed in the prophecy did not mean he saw his wife as dismissible, unlike the people of the court. For her, he told the wolf amongst them firmly. "As you say, my prince," he conceded, bowing his head. "Enough of this," Arthur declared, changing the subject. "Come and tell us about the North, Brandon. You've barely spoken of it since you've joined the Kingsguard." Brandon grinned and began to tell them of the North. Both Prince and Kingsguard listened as he weaved them a picture of what lay beyond the Neck. As a child, when he had read all the books he could find, Rek had been fascinated by the North. To him, it was a place of dire wolves, skin changers, and wargs, untamed forests, and above all, winter and first men who would suffer no strangers on their lands. Now, he was older and he realized that things in the North were not what he thought they were. Direwolves had not been seen south of the Wall for as long as anyone knew, and there were no skin changers in the North. As for strangers, it was that there weren't a lot of people interested in anything north of the Neck. In fact, there had not been a member of the royal family who has officially gone to the North since Aegon the Dragonbringer sent his son Daeron to be fostered at Winterfell like he had been. Granted, there was Aegon Thee and Ser Duncan the Tall, but they had not gone in an official capacity. And in all of the prince's reading, nothing had fascinated him as the ghost of the North. There were stories, but those were usually by word of mouth. There was very little about the ghost that was written down, and no picture was ever drawn of him. "Tell me something, Stark," he said, when Brandon had finished. "Have you met the ghost of the North?" The man who had the heir to the North fell silent for a moment and shifted his weight on the log he sat on. I have, once," he finally answered. "It was enough for me." "How would describe him?" "If he and Arya were to meet the ghost, he should know what he was like. He is the most terrifying person you could ever meet, yet he is also the one man who will lead you to the path that will suit you as well as the rest of the 7 kingdoms best." Those 2 sentences held a contradiction in their words. "What do you mean by that?" "Look at me, Prince Rhaegar, what do you see?" The Kingsguard from the North asked him. "I see a Stark of Winterfell, who has sworn himself to my father, the king," he answered. "Arthur, what do you see?" Brandon asked the Sword of the Morning. "I see my brother in all but name," he answered, wondering where this was going. "Then you only see what lays on the surface. The truth is, I'm a reckless, hot-tempered man. The wolf blood, my father called it. Lord Rickard's firstborn explained to them, but I'm also a little vain. None of these traits would have made me a good Lord of Winterfell or Warden of the North. Ned would be much better at it, despite what he may say otherwise." "Ned?" Arthur repeated, frowning as he said the name. "Lord Rickard's second son," Rocker told his friend. "I believe he's fostered at the Eyrie with one of Lord Steffan Baratheon's sons." "That's Ned," Brandon told him, showing his agreement. "But as I was saying, I'm a vain person who didn't want to be known as just another Lord of Winterfell. I wish to make my mark in the 7 kingdoms. But how could I when I was going to have responsibilities in the North? I spent countless hours in the Godswood seeking guidance for an answer, and that was when the ghost came to me." He fell silent as he stared at the fire in front of them before speaking again. "We spoke with one another for a few long hours. By the time we were done, I had made up my mind to come south to join the Kingsguard. I told my father that there was a trade offer in the south. I had wished to investigate, to see if there was anything to come of it. And your lord father agreed, thinking nothing of it. His fellow Kingsguard finished for him. He nodded. I spent 2 moons in Duskendale trying to figure out how exactly I was to go to the king and ask to be one of his 7. Then the defiance happened, and everything went from there, Rosier thought to himself. Brandon joined the Kingsguard, and therefore could not inherit Winterfell. If that is the ghost leading you onto the right path, how is he terrifying? Again, Brandon fell silent. During the time we talked, he told me about how he could and would take steps to ensure that Westeros would fall into utter chaos. When I asked him how he could do that, he told me that many years ago, a sellsword from Braavos came to Westeros looking to swear his sword to a noble house. The ghost had him killed before he could even find a house. The prince frowned when he heard those words. Why would he do that? What harm could a Braavosi sellsword do? I asked the same question. He told me that the harm would come not from him, but his descendants. His great-grandson will grow up into a man who would set the 7 kingdoms off into war and control one of them like it was a toy. Then he asked me what the greater crime was, killing the man or allowing the boy to be born. Neither the prince nor the Sword of the Morning answered him. But there has been some good from what he's done with that attitude. How? Asked Arthur. Rhaegar could not fault his friend for asking that question. He was a knight of the Kingsguard and was more inclined to see things in black and white. Do you remember when we spent the night at the Twins and Lord Steffron Frey told about the tragedy of his father's death? A tragedy? Repeated the Sword of the Morning. The man died in a hunting accident when his hounds mistook him for the prey they were hunting. If anything, that was a story to be laughed at as the Freys had done. It was no accident, Brandon said quietly, his voice and words floating over the fire. The work of the ghost? Asked Rekka. The Stark nodded. He waited to kill Lord Steffron's father, Lord Walder, until his son had been properly trained to lead the house. Then he had the dogs attack him and kill him. That, perhaps, was for the best, he decided, after a moment of silence. He had had the unfortunate pleasure of meeting the late Walder Frey once. After that meeting, he didn't think he could meet anyone else who was just as unlikable. He much preferred Lord Steffron. At the end of their journey, their company found themselves in the courtyard of Winterfell, with the entire castle out to greet them. Lord Rickard and his youngest son, Benjen, knelt before the prince and the princess. Prince Rhaegar, it is an honor to have you and Princess Yaya join us in Winterfell. Lord Rickard said to the prince, It is an honor to come to your home, Lord Rickard, he replied, motioning for the man and everyone to stand up. The man had the classic Stark looks as well. Even though his hair and beard had long since turned to white, and was taller than his eldest son, and so, when he stood again, the heir to the Iron Throne felt like he was standing before a giant. But that feeling didn't come from his height or his face. Eolia smiled at the Warden of the North. Winterfell is truly beautiful, my lord. It is suited to winter just as Sunspear is suited to summer. She looked a little odd, bundled up in furs the way she was. Thank you for your compliment, princess. Then everyone fell silent as Brandon approached his father. The two of them stayed silent as they looked at one another. Father, he began to say. A trade offer, his father said, interrupting him. With those 3 words, Rhaegar suddenly understood the reason why he had that feeling coming from the Warden of the North. The man carried himself like his ancestors of old, like a king in the North. That's what you said to me before going south. You lied to me and abandoned your duties as the heir to Winterfell to become a Kingsguard. Well, it was a trade offer, he jested weakly. The smile on his face disappeared as he looked at his father's stare. He couldn't hold the gaze and looked to his youngest brother. Benjen, you've certainly gotten bigger, and you haven't changed at all, Brandon. Benjen replied, looking at his brother with a smile. Before anyone could say anything, the sound of feet running across the ground filled the air. Then the prince and the princess saw a girl older than Benjen, but still younger than Brandon, charged straight at the Kingsguard Stark. Bren, she shrieked with joy as she leapt at him. He caught her in his arms and swung her around, laughing just as she was. It's good to see you again, Lié, he told her when he finally put her down. You're becoming the little she-wolf, aren't you? She swung her fist at his side, hitting where there was only leather to protect him. I'm not little, I'm bigger than Ben, she told him crossly. For now, Benjen muttered to himself, but he had said it loud enough for everyone to hear, making the people of Winterfell laugh at those words, even Lord Rickard. Prince Rhaegar, Princess Alia, This is my daughter, Lyanna, he introduced her. When she turned to look at them, Rhaegar bit back a breath. It was obvious that the girl was no lady. It showed in the way she held herself, unflinching and completely confident. He could see hints of what she would like as she grew older. Small things that would have escaped the eye of someone else. But that was not what made him bit his breath. It was her eyes, gray as a storm cloud. They seemed to look past all the titles he had carried with him and saw him, and from the way his wife bit back her breath as well, he could see that Alia saw the same thing as he did. "It's nice to meet the both of you," she told them with a curtsy that was wooden, showing that she didn't really practice it. "Lyanna, show respect," her father told her. "This is the heir to the Iron Throne and his wife." She stiffened slightly when she heard those words. Then she tried to again. "It's an honor to house the prince and the princess at Winterfell," she told Rhaegar and Ellair with another wooden curtsy. The dress she wore was old. They could see it when she curtsied. "If you will follow me, your highness, I will show you and your lady wife to your rooms." The maester standing next to the warden of the north told them. He turned and they followed. That night, they feasted in the great hall. It was a quiet feast and small compared to the ones Rhaegar had been to in the Red Keep. There were no singers, but the hall was filled with talk and the occasional bout of laughter. "Did you visit River Run on your way here?" Lord Rickard asked him. He absently noted that Brandon had become rather uncomfortable at that question, flicking his gaze away to the other end of the hall. "No, we felt that would be an uncomfortable visit," he answered. "Since Catelyn Tully was supposed to be Brandon's wife, that would have been awkward. Is Lord Tully still intent on having his eldest daughter become the Lady of Winterfell?" "Yes, but now she is betrothed to my second son, Eddard." "How has Ned been?" Brandon dared to ask his father, looking at him. "He has been well. He and Stannis Baratheon are getting along quite well," he answered. However, his letters indicated a little trouble recently. "What happened?" There was concern in the Kingsguard's voice, showing that he was worried for his little brother. His father must have heard the concern. "You need not worry. Ned is fine," he told him. Stannis' brother came to visit, but before he left, he got a girl pregnant. Rather than taking responsibility for his action, he refused to come back before the girl gave birth. So, Stannis took responsibility for the baby. "It was born safely?" Alia asked. He nodded once. "She was born, but her mother died. Her name is Maya Stone. And from what Ned's letter had said, Robert has not come once to see her." Both Rhaegar and his wife shared looks of slight disgust at those words. He had met his cousin once when he had been a boy. He had been an excitable fellow who kept on charming the ladies with his boyish grin and antics. And yet, Lord Stefan had always looked at him with sadness and regret in his eyes. Would he keep those eyes now? Rhaegar thought to himself. Lyanna was less inclined to keep her thoughts to herself. "And you wanted me to marry him," she said to her father with a definitely unladylike snort. Even though Lord Rickard frowned at his daughter, the curiosity of the royal party was aroused now. "You would break a betrothal because of a single bastard?" the prince asked. He knew he sounded callous, but the Starks were not like nobles in the south. He wanted to see how they reacted. They didn't disappoint. Lord Rickard, Lyanna, Benjen, and even Brandon, who knew him, threw him a look that spoke volumes. "Your pardon, my prince, but we are Starks," Rickard said in that voice that made him seem like he was an actual king. "To us, a bastard is only a dishonor if you reject and ignore it. They are your blood, and if you ignore them, then it is you who brings the dishonor." Benjen added, trying to sound just like his father and look like him too. It worked, to an extent. "If Robert had acknowledged the girl and looked after her, I might have considered being married to him," Lyanna said. "I see! Forgive my callous way of asking. In the South, we are more used to nobles not even laying a single glance on their bastards." He apologized to them all. "Except for Dorne," Ely added, feeling the need to defend her home. He gave her a nod of thanks, having momentarily forgotten how different Dorne was. It was at that moment he realized that Lyanna had used the word might when talking about his cousin. In that regard, the North and Dorne are the same. The Lord of Winterfell conceded to her. Benjen looked to ask a question when a crow flew into the hall and landed on the table in front of Elia. It cawed once at her and then hopped over to him, cawing once again. When it was done, it took flight and left the same way it came in. When it did, the hall was silent. "The ghost will want to see you now," Lord Rickard said quietly. He'll await you in the Godswood. Both Rhaegar and Ilya stood up from the table. Arthur tried to stand up as well, but Brandon placed a firm hand on his shoulder and shook his head. The prince and the princess walked down the length of the great hall, silence following their every step. When they reached the doors, they opened to reveal 3 direwolves, which turned around, padded away. Seeing no choice but to follow them, they did. The direwolves led them into the Godswood before disappearing beyond their sight. But Rosieri did not falter once he lost sight of them. He had read the journal of Aegon the Conqueror, a prized treasure of the house. He knew where the Ghost of the North would be, and he wasn't disappointed. So, you two have finally arrived, the ghost said from where he sat against the trunk of the heart tree. We have, Ilya said in return. It was obvious that she did not believe in what she had heard of the ghost, but she was still respectful. Why have you summoned us? To tell you what will occur in the next few days. What will happen? Rhaegar asked him. That child will be born. He pointed at Alyia's swollen stomach. But you will die, he told Alia, his eyes staring directly into hers. While she did look shocked by his words, Rhaegar could see it in her eyes. She remained true to the words of her house. You do not know that. Oh, but I do. That child was not meant to be born this year. He was to be born later, much later, only to die. This is a chance for him to live the life he should have. And to do that, a life must be given. The way he spoke those words made it sound like he was talking about the harvest, or the training of a squire, not the death of someone Rhaegar cared for, or the birth of a child. But it was what he had said that got the prince's attention. The child will be a boy? He couldn't help but ask. He will be the prince that was promised. Yes to the first and no to the second. A king can't be a prince, can he? The ghost asked, an amused smile appearing, his barely concealed lips. But the prophecy states, the smile disappeared just as quickly as the fury in his eyes appeared. Don't speak to me of the prophecy, boy. I was ancient when the first copy was put to pen. The whole Godswood seemed to darken as he spoke, anger filling his voice. Fear struck Rosier as he stood before the Ghost of the North. It felt like he was seeing the man for the first time in all his fury, power, and glory. It felt like the earth shook at his words. But perhaps that was just his fear speaking for him. For forgive me, he apologized, looking away. He just could not hold his gaze. You'll thank me later, the ghost told him. Standing up from where he had sat, what do you mean by that? I'm saving you two a lot of trouble in the long run. You might hate me and you may even curse me. But in the end, you will be thankful. He walked away from the heir to the Iron Throne and the Princess of Dorne. As he walked, the darkness seemed to swallow him whole, making him disappear from sight. In that moment of seeing the ghost disappear, Rosierger realized what Brandon had said was right. He was truly a frightening person. Talking. Thinking. Location Harrenhal. The stands were filled with people, all excited for the tourney that was to come. Lord Wen had offered prizes that were most lavish and had attracted many challengers to come and compete. He had boasted that this would be a tourney for the ages, and it was certainly looking to be just that. From how many people had come alone. She sat on the throne next to her husband and brother, but her eyes were on her son. Roge had been in mourning for more than a year for Allier. He went north with a wife and came back with a son, as the small folk were prone to say, or so Lord Varys told them. Despite hopeful Lord's wishes, her son had not remarried. Finally, the king would have no more of it. The dragon must have 3 heads, boy, she heard him tell their son. One late night, or have you forgotten that? That was another reason why so many had come to this tournament. The king had announced that the crown prince was willing to take another wife, and all young noble ladies who weren't married and had flowered will present themselves to him. Whole families had come to Harrenhal just for the chance their daughter could become a princess. That was what was happening right now. Each of those young ladies walked up the steps to the royal stand, stood before the royal family, the ones that were there. The children were back in King's Landing, and given some small time to charm the crown prince. There was no small measure of pride she had about that. The fact that so far, not a single one of them had been successful. She had cared for Alia, just as Racker did, just as her ladies-in-waiting did. Ashara looked like she wanted to attack each and every one of the women who came forward. Neither she nor the rest of Alia's ladies-in-waiting had joined the chance to charm her son. For that, the queen was proud of them. As for her son, he did not show whether or not he was interested in the women being shown to him like cattle. She didn't know why, but she did not want to pry. How her son wanted to mourn was his right, but her husband was less inclined to think so. And there's not a single one that interests you, boy, the king asked his son, who only shook his head. Worthless chits, he hissed, offending the family who was just leaving. This is the last family to present themselves to you today, Your Grace, Brandon Stark said to the king. For that, Rosierlo wanted to thank the man. The entire first day of the tourney had felt long with all the women presenting themselves to Rogier. And it's your family as well, Brandon, her brother remarked, swinging his head over to look at his Kingsguard. Perhaps you have told them that the prince will fall in love with your sister. There was a gleam in his eyes that seemed to speak of barely concealed madness. Something had changed about Aerys after the defiance of Duskendale. She wasn't sure what, but there were moments when she thought that he seemed crueler. Whether Brandon saw the gleam or not, and whether he thought of it as a sign of madness, was unknown to her, and he did not show it. My king, the last time I spoke to my family was when Prince Rhaegar was leaving the north, and Starks know better than to pursue a chance of marriage with a recently widowed. Thank you for your honesty, Brandon, Rhaegar said quietly from where he sat. It had been the first actual thing he had said that, aside from the few pleasantries he gave to each and every one of the ladies. You may wish to keep your thanks, Ashara remarked from where she sat. They approached. Rosier turned her attention to the group that now stood before the royal stand. By now, everyone else now looked their way too, for two reasons. The first was because this was the last family to present themselves to the king. And the second was because this family was the Starks of Winterfell. Since Lord Rickard wasn't here and Brandon belonged by the king's side, the man who stood for the group was Lord Rickard's second son, Eddard. But there was someone else with the Starks, someone she had not thought to see with them. And the king saw it too. Cousin Stannis, you stand with the Starks, her brother remarked loudly for all to hear. Have you decided to marry into their house? No, your grace, Stannis answered. Stefan's grumpy little boy had grown into a grim-faced young man. Oh, there was no doubt he was a Baratheon. One could tell that just by looking at his short-cropped black hair and his ice-cold blue eyes. My father, Lord Stefan, sent me and my brother Robert, along with a small number of knights, to this tourney to participate. And where are your brother now and your knights? His grim face morphed into a frown. They're off drinking. My brother felt that one Baratheon was enough to greet the king and his family. The king said, mostly to himself. Then he swung his attention to the rest of the group standing before the royal stand. And who here speaks for the wolves? My king, I am Eddard Stark, second son to Lord Rickard Stark of Winterfell. The man who stood beside Stannis stepped forward and introduced himself. He was by no means a copy of his older brother, being smaller and less handsome than Brandon. But it was quite clear he was a Stark. My father is regretful that he cannot come himself and has sent me, my brother Benjen and my sister Lyanna in his stead. His brother and sister stood by his side, as did someone else. Viserys noticed it the same time she did. Then who is the woman who stands beside you, my lord? He asked. The woman stepped away from Lord Eddard's side and stepped forward. I am Lady Catelyn Tully, my king, eldest daughter to Lord Huster Tully. I am betrothed to Lord Eddard, she announced. The Lady Catelyn was a beauty. One could see it in her red hair and blue eyes. She wore no ostentatious jewelry or dresses. She only wore a dress of blue. As she spoke, the queen noticed that Brandon Stark was doing his best to avoid eye contact with her, and she was doing the same. Of course, he was to marry her, she thought to herself. And if they made eye contact, no doubt things would become uneasy between them. And I take it that you are here to present your sister to my son. Her king asked young Eddard, looking at the other woman in the group. You must be. Why else would you be here? 7 hells, girl. You're like a twig, completely skinny. Do you have any hips on you at all? He asked her rather rudely. She did not look insulted or offended by his words. I must have, my king. How else would I walk? She asked him politely, and with nothing showing on her lips. She asked with a solemn seriousness, yet she must have been jesting. She must have if the muffled snorts from Brandon and the youngest Stark were anything to go by. Axles did not seem to find it funny. You are not here to make japes, girl. You're here to try and seduce him. He pointed one of his fingers at Rogier. So get to it, come up here and try to charm him. Rosier looked at her husband with slight disgust. He was the one who had decided Rosier needed to marry again. He could at least not treat it so callously. But if the Stark girl was insulted, she did not show it. She took the 3 short steps it took to get up onto the royal stand. She stood before Rosier and curtsied to him. How is your son, Prince Rosier? She asked him. His eyes looked at her when he heard those words. "He is well, my lady," he answered. "I'm glad to hear that. He was a happy child when he was in the north." "A little short-tempered, though," she amended. "He only seemed happy when you held him." "Aegon has the blood of the dragon running through his veins, and dragons are not known for their patience," he told her. "But you did not let that stop you. If I recall correctly, Lady Lyanna, you kept trying to care for him when he did not want to be near you." "I'm a Stark of Winterfell, your highness. We care for the children that live underneath our roof, all of them," she answered. She fell silent for a moment and then spoke again. "How is the Princess Rhaenys?" "She is well too, but she has taken her mother's death hard." His face morphed into an expression of sadness as he spoke of his wife. Her face took on a similar expression. "I'm sorry to hear that. Princess Ea was a woman a man should cherish." She curtsied to him, and then to the king and queen before leaving the stand and walking away with her family. Interesting, Raxley checked. Despite many of the ladies who came before who had asked about his children, they had all gushed about how beautiful and smart his daughter was, or how handsome and roars his son would be like. Lyanna Stark was the only one to have asked how they really were, and once she had her answer, she had left. She had not once tried to charm her son. She would have to keep an eye on her. The tourney began soon after, and the people, both nobles and small folk alike, enjoyed the sports immensely. While she had never really been one for watching such things, she could admit that it was exciting. There had been a grand horse race, and a tourney for the singers on the first day alone, and at night there was great feasting. Each and every night there was a feast in the Hall of the 100 Hearts. Food and drink flowed freely between all the people there. It was on the then night that things became interesting again, and it all began. Ashera Dane came back to the royal table, holding her cheek with her hand. "What happened?" her brother Arthur asked her once he saw the way she held her cheek. She didn't answer him. Instead, she looked at Brandon. "Your sister struck me," she said with a snarl, showing what was hiding beneath her cheek. It was a red imprint of a hand, a woman's hand. But instead of defending his sister, the Stark in the King's Guard simply shook his head. "I told you not to flirt with Ned, Ash. He's not like me," he told her. There had been some harmless flirting between the two of them during Brandon's time in the King's Guard. But that was all. "That wasn't why she struck me," she retorted. "After that man of the Night's Watch had made his plea, all I said was that if he wanted to find men to make crows, all he had to do was look in dungeons for men desperate enough to fly free." At the nearby tables, the lords and ladies who had heard the jape chuckled at it, but Brandon did not. He just looked at her with a somewhat stunned expression on his face. "You insulted the Night's Watch?" he finally asked her. "It was just a jape," she told him, sounding annoyed about that. He was more concerned about what she said instead of what happened to her. "Ash, you insulted the Night's Watch. Anyone from the north would hit you if they heard the Night's Watch be insulted in front of them. Just be glad you didn't say it in front of the Umbers. They would have killed you outright." She scowled at him before sitting down in the chair she had left. Rosier Nasa could only smile at the younger woman. Ashera had taken it upon herself to indirectly judge each of the ladies who had tried to seduce Racker, trying to scare them off. The Starks had been the most recent group, and it seemed that she failed. Admittedly, she had also tried to flirt with Brandon's younger brother, but stopped after a few minutes. It seemed that young Aedard was the kind of man who would be faithful to his lady wife. Her eyes wandered over to where the Starks sat. With them sat a small man that hadn't been there the previous nights. He sat between the youngest Stark and the Lady Lyanna. The youngest Stark was pointing at a table for squires, and the Stark she-wolf had a look of anger. When she gazed upon the table, she clearly saw something that angered her. There was a soft scrape as a chair was pushed back and her son stood up from the table. He walked quietly to the herald and whispered in the man's ear. The man nodded once and banged his staff on the floor, attracting the attention of everyone in the room. "The Prince Rhaegar had chosen to honor us with a song," he announced, for all to hear. Silence reigned in the hall as Rhaegar took his place with his harp in hand. When he strummed the first notes, he began to sing. His notes were mournful, and so was his voice. He sang of many things, but he mostly sang about love and how it could be lost. Everyone there could tell he was singing about Elia. She could see that there were tears in many people's eyes as they listened, especially the ladies, especially Lyanna Stark. When the song was finished and her son fell silent, it was silent in the hall as well. Then the clapping and cheering erupted. They all applauded thunderously and praised his song. Yet he did not take in the applause and the cheers. Instead, he looked over at the Stark table, where Lyanna had just finished pouring wine over her little brother's head. "Do you prefer to pour wine over your brother's head than listen to my music, Lady Lyanna?" he asked aloud, silencing the hall again. The Lady Stark flushed when she realized that all the eyes were on her now. "Not at all, my prince," she answered him. "But little brothers can be annoying and must be properly chastised." The youngest Stark was trying to mop the wine out of his hair and glared at her when he heard that. "As for your music, I think it was a sad and lovely song. But to me, there have been too many sad and lovely songs sung tonight. Then what do you think should be played?" She smiled. "Why, the ones that makes a person sing, dance, and smile. Bran, Ned, Ben, could you give me a beat, please?" she asked her brothers, looking at each one of them as she spoke their names. Identical grins broke out on their faces in response, and they all stood up from their chairs, even the youngest one, who still had wine in his hair. To the surprise of the people in the hall, they made their way over to where the singers were and took instruments from them. They began to play a song, and Lyanna joined in with her voice. When the men and women from the north heard the song being played, they cheered loudly and rushed to the center of the hall, or to grab more instruments. The music swelled, and the people from the north began to dance. This was no formal dance one would see in court, where the ladies in night danced beautifully. It was more akin to the dances the small folk would dance. Those who did not play or dance clapped along with the beat. It was a simple clap, and yet it seemed to help the song along. Even the people who weren't from the north had begun clapping along. And while the song was played, the Lady Lyanna sang. It wasn't the same as how her son sang. The Stark girl did not try to place herself in the minds of people with her voice, to be remembered afterwards. Instead, she sang for the here and now. What had happened and what could happen did not matter to her when she sang. She only sang of what was happening now. She sang of simple things, of warmth, family, and joy. And there were some songs that were witty and had the people in the hall laughing. When she wasn't singing, she was dancing. She either danced alone or she danced with someone. But she danced, and she danced with joy in her steps and her laughter. It was almost hard to think of her as a Stark in those moments. Already there were men of all titles, nobles, lords, and knights, looking at her with desire in her eyes. None more so than Robert Baratheon. She was certainly pretty, but she was no Cersei Lannister, which Rhaella sent a thankful prayer to the Seven for having her married to Oberyn Martell. She did not want to think of how that lioness might have tried to get her son. However, that did not work against her. In fact, it was the opposite. If Cersei was the kind of beauty that could only belong to the gods, Lyanna was a beauty for this earth. 2 days later, the entire tourney ground watched in silence as Jaime Lannister approached the royal stand. He was a handsome lad with the golden hair and green eyes of the House of Lannister. He wore armor that gleamed golden in the sunlight, and while he wore a lion-crested helm, it neither sat on his head nor was it held in his arms today. When he reached the front of the royal stand, where the 6 members of the Kingsguard stood in full armor and with swords drawn, he stopped. They stepped forward and encircled him, lifting their swords and holding their tips at his neck. He did not move, nor did he look afraid. The king stood up from his throne and walked down the steps. He stood before the young knight in the space left by the 6 knights. "Are you Sir Jaime Lannister, he who is blood of the lion?" he asked. "I am he, and I have come to serve my king," he answered. The king stared at him for a long moment. "Kneel," he finally ordered. The Lannister knight did as he was ordered, and the 6 blades of the Kingsguard held their circle like a halo above him. "Sir Jaime Lannister, we strip you of all titles that belong to your house. We strip you of all lands that are or will be ruled by you. We forbid you from taking any wife and fathering any children. Do you accept these so you may protect your king?" "I do," Tywin's eldest son answered. "Then stand as a brother of the King's Guard." The halo of swords broke apart as he stood. Each of the 6 Kingsguard held their swords with the blade pointing skyward in a salute. A squire quietly walked up to the king and gave him a white cloak. When Jaime stood, the king fastened the cloak to him. "We welcome you, Sir Jaime Lannister of the King's Guard." The entire tourney ground exploded with applause and cheers, not to mention a few tears from maidens for such a loss. But while they cheered, the queen just watched the king. The last time she had seen him speak with such conviction, it had been directed at the Red Priestess of R'hllor, who had come a few weeks after Duskendale. She had tried to seduce Aerys into converting to the worship of the Red God, and it nearly worked. But then she tried to get him to burn the Godswood in sacrifice to her god. Instead, he told her about what the Godswood held and what it meant to the royal family. Once he had finished, he had ordered her to be bound in chains and thrown into the Black Cell. She knew that her brother had planned to kill the Red Priestess by having her be the one burned, but she had escaped before it could happen. How she had escaped was still a mystery to those who live in the Red Keep to this day. "Our first command of you, Sir Jaime, is this," the king spoke out again, getting the attention of the newest Kingsguard, who was being congratulated by his new brothers. "You will protect our queen as she rides for King's Landing." In the stunned silence that followed, the queen acted. "That will not be necessary, my dear," she told her brother. "I've decided to stay and watch the tourney after all." He regarded silently for a moment. "Very well, but he will still guard you. He will win no glory here. I shall take him to his first post, my king," Brandon said before clasping a hand on his newest brother's shoulder. "Come along, Sir Cube." Jaime's cheeks flushed at those words, and the nearby nobles did their best to hide their laughter. Rilla could understand why it was they did that. The newest Kingsguard was only 5 and 10, making him the youngest Kingsguard ever now, and he was more Cube than Lion. But Rosierda just watched in silence as Jaime took his place by her side. She knew the true reason for why he was chosen for the Kingsguard. It wasn't for his skill or because Aerys meant it as a slight against Tywin. No, it was for his mother. And she could still remember that day. Flashback. "The Lady Joanna Lannister of Casterly Rock," announced the herald as the wife of Tywin came forward to stand in the Iron Throne. "Your Grace," she curtsied to the king as she spoke. "Lady Joanna, are you here to see your lord husband?" Aerys asked her, curiosity coloring his voice. She shook her head. "No, your Grace. I have come to speak to you of a request I have, one that only you should hear." He fell silent, and for a moment, the shadow casted by the Iron Throne seemed to cover his face. Then that moment passed. "Empty the hall," he announced, for all to hear. Everyone stared at him, unsure of what they had heard. "I said empty the hall," he roared. Those who did not leave the hall immediately were caught in the horde that followed. Once they were gone, all that remained were the Kingsguard and Rhaella. "I will not repeat myself a third time, my king," the White Bull began to say, only to receive a glare in response. He fell silent and then spoke again. "As you command, we will withdraw to the outer rooms." The 6 Kingsguard walked away, and Rhaella followed them. But while they left the room, she stayed in the shadows. She knew that her brother had lusted after Joanna before she had married Tywin. She wanted to see what would happen between the two. "What is it you want?" the king finally asked Joanna, standing up from his throne. "All of Westeros has heard of how Sir Towrin Grandison died. Have you found his replacement?" she asked him. "Why? Have you someone in mind?" "My firstborn son, Jaime," she answered. Silence reigned in the hall as the words she said seemed to hang in the air. It was an answer Rosiad had not thought would be said, and from the looks of it, neither did the king. "Does my hand know of this? I would think Tywin would have something to say about his heir becoming one of my 7. "Tywin doesn't know about this, and it is because Jaime is his heir that I ask this of you. I know my sons, both of them. Of the 2, Jaime is a skilled warrior, but he doesn't care for how a kingdom should rule or how the game is played. Tywin would not see this and believe that Jaime is the son he always wanted. This still does not explain why you wish to have your son join the Kingsguard," he told her. He began to walk down the steps of the Iron Throne, his footsteps echoing in the hall. "I ask this of you, your grace, so I can make Tywin see reason. The son he always wanted is his second son, Tyrion." Rosiad had heard of the second son of Tywin Lannister. Supposedly, what beauty had been given to Jaime and Cersei had been denied to Tyrion. He had been born a dwarf and was kept at the Rock. Tyrion has the same intelligence his father has, and the ruthlessness to match. If Jaime becomes Lord of the Rock, the Westerlands will suffer. But if Tyrion takes that seat when his father dies, they will prosper. "So, you would have me slight my hand, just so he can realize the potential in his dwarf of a second son?" he asked as he stepped off the final step of the Iron Throne and stood a few inches away from her. "Yes," she answered, never wavering from where she stood. For the longest time, nothing was said between the two of them. It was all but suffocating, how nothing was spoken. "Fine, I will grant you your request, the king finally said. But I want something in return. What is it? A kiss, he told her. If you kiss me, I will put your firstborn in the king's guard. Rosierla would have thought that Joanna would refuse, showing her pride as a Lannister. But she did nothing of the sort. She took the 2 steps needed and kissed him on the lips. The kiss didn't last long, and yet it seemed to Rosierla to last until the end of time. When the kiss was done and Joanna stepped away, Aerys was crying. Why? He asked her with tears falling down his cheeks. Why couldn't you have loved me? I would have given you everything. In that moment, the queen realized that her brother hadn't lusted after Joanna. He loved her. She smiled at him, gently and sadly. I know that, but I didn't want everything. She stepped back, curtsied, and walked away. The king was left in the hall of the Iron Throne with tears flowing freely and his queen watching from the shadows. In flashback, the sound of a horse making its way to the royal stand brought Raxlia to the reality around her. Atop the horse sat her son. Have you unmasked the Knight of the Laughing Tree, my son? The king asked him. The queen knew what he was talking about. The previous day, a mystery knight had ridden out onto the lists and challenged 3 knights to joust. His armor had been mismatched pieces, but his shield was blazoned with an image of a weirwood tree that was laughing, hence the name. They had all been soundly defeated, and the mystery knight took their armor and horses. When the knights tried to ransom their armor and horses, the Knight of the Laughing Tree said that teaching their squares honor would be ransom enough. They did so, and the mystery knight rode off. He did not reappear this morning, and the king, thinking that he must have been some sort of spy or enemy, had sent their son after the knight, and now it was the afternoon of the same day. Rogier shook his head. No, my king, he answered. I did not. The king scowled at the prince, clearly anger. But I did make a bargain with him. And what was this bargain? That if I am able to win the joust and be named champion, he would appear and challenge me. And should I win, he will reveal himself. That caused quite stir to the people closest enough to hear his words. Rosierla had no doubt that soon everyone would hear of it. Challenges were usually given on the day the challenger means to joust. To challenge someone on the last day, and only if they were the champion had never been done before. But the king was perturbed by the idea. Very well, he said. You'd best win then. I plan to, your grace, Rodier replied. As expected of her son, he had won the joust. Now it was the last day, and everyone who had come to Harrenhal had filled the stands and the grounds surrounding the field. There was a hush in the air as they all waited for the mystery knight, wondering if he would actually show himself to them. They did not wait long. The Knight of the Laughing Tree appeared out from the crowd, riding his horse to the lists. Once there, he stopped his horse on the opposite end from Rhaegar. Aerys was barely paying attention to the small ceremony blessing the last joust. We've been here this long and the boy hasn't found any he might consent to marry, he muttered to himself, loud enough for only Roxla to hear. Now I'll have to send someone to look for Valyrian blood noble enough to marry him again. Perhaps you don't need to do that, Aerys, she whispered to him, so that others would not hear them. We almost lost Stefan the last time you sent him to look for a worthy bride. They had been told of how the Windproud barely managed to reach Storm's End before a storm had hit, seeing Stefan and his wife safely home. If they had been out at sea any longer, the ship would have been smashed to pieces in Shipbreaker Bay. He turned his head to look at her. Then what do you suggest? Who is worthy of marrying the dragon? A family whose blood and lineage was ancient and powerful when ours was the weakest in the freehold, she answered. He stared at her for a moment, knowing full well who she was talking about. But before he could say anything, the horn was blown and the two jousters charged forward with their lances at the ready. Everyone watched with bated breath as the two clashed. All knew that the prince was skilled with the lance, but the mystery knight had proven that he was good as well. But both lances smashed against the shields, shattering in the process, and neither ride fell off. They kept on riding until they reached the end of the lists, and turned to try again, holding fresh lances. Again and again they rode, smashing lances against each other. The people held their breath and released it every time they rode down each other, and then rode past each other. 7 times they broke lances against one another, but on the 8th lance, Rhaegar proved to be stronger and the Knight of the Laughing Tree flew from his saddle and landed on the ground. The entirety of the people there exploded into a roar of cheering and whistling, praising her son for his deed. Then they all went silent as the king stood up from his throne. "The prince has jousted well today, and has been named champion," he said to all who would hear his words. "As such, it is his choice to crown a lady who is here the queen of love and beauty. But as he also has a duty to remarry again, I declare this here and now, whoever my son, Prince Rhaegar, crowns as the queen of love and beauty shall also be taken as his wife." The chatter arose from all those present as the herald strode forward to offer the crown of blue winter roses to Rhaegar. Everyone was interested in who he would choose as his new wife. For the past 10 days, every single noble lady had been paraded past him, and most had tried to convince him to take her as his wife. Now they would see who he would pick. But to the surprise of everyone, he did not urge his horse to any part of the stands. Instead, he climbed down from his horse and had a squire take away his helmet and his shield before walking over to the fallen Mystery Knight, offering a hand to help him, making the chatter go silent. The Knight of the Laughing Tree took the hand and stood back up. The two knights stood across from one another, one helmeted looking at the other's face. "I believe we had a bargain," Rilgier told the Mystery Knight, his voice floating quietly in the wind, but was still heard by everyone there. The Knight of the Laughing Tree stared at him for another minute or so. Then he took his shield off of his arm, letting it fall to the earth, and reached up to take off his helmet, and when the face of the knight was shown to all gasped in surprise. It was none other than Lyanna Stark, the she-wolf of Winterfell. "You joust well, my lady," Roger told her, sounding like it was no surprise to find her standing before him. She gave quite the unladylike snort. "Not good enough," she replied, "otherwise I would have knocked you to the ground." The surprise was now gone from the people who looked on, and was replaced with shock in how she spoke to the prince. Then, who would have crowned as the queen of love and beauty? She smirked at those words. "I wouldn't have crowned a queen. I would have crowned a king." He didn't say anything in response to that. Instead, he placed the crown of blue winter roses on her brow. And while everyone saw this, Rosierla saw the fury in Robert Baratheon's eyes. Talking, thinking, location, Sunspear. She hated her. She hated her father's new wife. She hated everything about her. The way she barely acted like a lady in court, her accent, her choice of clothes, just everything about her. But what she hated the most was the fact that people had seemed to have forgotten all about her mother. Even Aegon had done that, and he was just a baby, and it hurt most of all when she saw her father shower his new wife with love. She and father had married barely 3 months after coming home from Harrenhal, having the wedding in the Godswood, which was stupid. Weddings took place in the Great Sept, and it was only 8 months after that she became big in the tummy. People told her that her father's new wife was carrying her sibling, but that didn't make her hate the Stark woman any less. When they had traveled to Sunspear, she was happy to find out that her uncles and cousins disliked her just as much as she did. They couldn't hate her because they had to act courteous to her or some stupid reason like that. They showed their distaste for in the way they acted and spoke to her. She admired how they could do that because, for all of her hatred for the Stark woman, she was intimidating and scared her a little. One such time happened when they were having a feast inside the Tower of the Sun. All the noble houses of Dorne seemed to be there, enjoying the food and drink set out before them, while the royal family and House Martell sat at the royal table. "How do you find Dorne, your highness?" Prince Dorne asked her. He was the sneakier of her two uncles because he could smile while also insulting the Stark woman. "I like it well enough," she answered him. "The only problem I have is it's too damn hot." "Hot?" asked her other uncle, Prince Oberyn, from where he sat with a cup in hand. "I assure Lady Stark, it's quite mild here. You should try Dorne when it's actually summer." "Oberyn," Dorne said quietly, a quiet chastisement in his voice. Both her uncles might not like the Stark woman, but Uncle Oberyn was the only who actually showed it. "Please address Prince Rhaegar's wife properly." "That is not necessary, Prince Doran," the Stark woman told him, moving carefully so her big belly wouldn't be hurt. "I am of the North. We're not really built for summers in Doran." "Ah, yes, the North, home to your fabled ghost," Uncle Oberyn said, draining his cup and filling it up again. His wife, Aunt Cersei, sat next to him and was more focused on her children at that moment. "One would think he's a god the way you Northerners prattle on about him. He's not a god, Seer, just their messenger. God or not, he has blood on his hands. Dornish blood," he declared. "And if I have a chance, I would make him pay for that blood." Whatever niceties the Stark woman was going to say died away when those words were said. She put the cup in her hand onto the table, loud enough for the entire hall to hear. "Prince Oberyn, Were I not pregnant, and were you not drunk, I would think that would be a threat against the ghost of the North, and would remove your head from your shoulders myself for such a threat, she said in a voice for all to hear, which they did when they heard the cup be placed down. Uncle Oberyn looked at her anger in his eyes. How dare you, he asked her. She ignored him in favor of the nobles before her. Who amongst you follows the old gods? She asked in that same voice, standing up from her chair. Rosie's thought it to be a stupid question, but then one of the stony Dornishmen stood. House Yarrowwood does, Princess Lyanna, he said. Another stony Dornishman stood as well. So does House Fowler. More and more Dornishmen and women stood and answered the Stark woman, until it was about a third of the people there. What would you do if the ghost of the North came to all of you and told you that House Nameros Martell was forfeit? She asked them all. We would march upon them at once and extinguish them, the Ironwood man answered, throwing a look at Uncle Oberyn as he spoke. You are very arrogant to threaten my husband in the middle of Sunspear, Princess Lyanna, Aunt Cersei told the Stark woman, looking her straight in the eye. Keep going, Aunt Cersei, Rhaenys silently cheered. She had been a Lannister before she married Uncle Oberyn and carried his children, and from what she knew, Lannisters never backed down. If there was anyone who could possibly intimidate the Stark woman, it would be her. But the Stark woman would not back down. Do you know of how the North reacted to your father's decision to destroy House Rhaen and House Tarbeck, Lady Cersei? She asked. When she didn't get an answer, she continued, we did not fear him or his precious song. For something similar once happened to the North. She turned her gaze to Uncle Doran. Have you ever heard of House Bolton, Your Highness? He seemed to think it over for a moment before shaking his head. I have not, Princess Lyanna. Their banner was a flayed man, red on pink. Their words were, our blades are sharp. And the reason you have not heard of them before was because they no longer exist. All eyes were on her when she spoke. Even Rhaenys, who didn't want to look at her but couldn't help it. The Boltons were infamous in the North for flaying their enemies and had waged war many times against the Starks. Even when they had bent the knee and swore allegiance to the king in the North, they still caused trouble, and that was what sealed their fate. The ghost of the North went to the head of House Bolton, and all but ordered him to stop the practice of flaying. Enraged at his pride being insulted, the Bolton did a very stupid thing. What's that? Aegon asked her, his eyes shining bright with both fear and excitement. He tried to flay the ghost. There was an audible gasp in the hall from those who followed the old gods when they all heard this. He failed, of course, and the ghost left the Dreadfort. He appeared at Winterfell, in the court of the king in the North, and declared that for what they had done, House Bolton was forfeit. Amongst the lords and ladies of the North, the king's own squire was a Bolton. He was the first of them to die. She had a smile on her face that seemed wolf-like when she said that. Ravens were sent, men were gathered, and the entire fury of the North was directed at the Dreadfort. I'm sure such a host was terrible to behold for House Bolton. Uncle Doran told her. Raincios wasn't sure if he was mocking her or not. You misunderstand, Prince Doran. The entire fury of the North was directed at the Boltons. Animals that could be killed for food fled their land. Any seed sowed into the land would not sprout. All water near the Dreadfort turned filthy, making men sick. Nature itself turned against the Boltons, and that hastened their demise. When the armies of the North broke into the Dreadfort, they razed it to the ground and slaughtered everyone there. Not a single soul was left, or a single stone. She looked at Uncle Oberyn. All because of pride and anger, she finished. The hall had seemed to darken when she said those words. But perhaps that was just Rainsy. But once she had finished, the light came back, and neither of her uncles said a word back. 2 days after that feast, she found herself watching the sand snakes train under the gaze of her uncle's guard, Arohata. The sand snakes were Uncle Oberyn's bastard daughters, who he brought home to Drone so he could be an actual father to them. Rhaenys didn't know what Aunt Cersei thought of that, but she did know that the sand snakes were fiercely protective of their little sisters. The training ended with Aberez, the eldest sand snake, victory. She stood over Namireh, the second eldest, sword in hand and a grin on her face. I win, she declared loudly. Both Rhaenys and Aegon applauded her efforts, along with Tyee and Cirella, the younger sand snakes, who were barely older than Aegon. Yes, we heard you. Nymeria told her elder sister, now would you mind moving so I can stand back up again? Obara did so. Rhaenys could not help but see the difference between the two of them. Where Nymeria was slim, Obara was bulky. Where Nymeria had black hair of a raven, Obara had brown hair one would find on a rat. It was said that none of the sand snakes looked like one another, and Rhaenys knew that to be true. Tirce was blonde and Sarella looked like she came from the Summer Isles. People also said that they all had their father's eyes, but she couldn't see it. Very impressive, the voice of the Stark woman spoke out, surprising everyone there. They all turned to see her standing at one of the entrances to the courtyard. Behind her stood Sir Arthur. But your stance is stiff and your form is left open when you try to lunge. And how would you know? Obara challenged her. Like Rhaenys, their father, the Sand Snakes hated the Stark woman. You're just a northerner. I am that, and I managed to convince my lord father to practice with my brothers when I was younger. When I couldn't spar, I watched. Rogiers knew she was telling the truth. Sometimes she would see her sparring against her brother Sir Brandon, who would always laugh and say he wasn't a knight when she called him Sir. But Obara wasn't going to let it go with that. Why don't you prove it then? She demanded. Sir Arth looked like he was about to say something, but the Stark woman spoke first. I would indulge you, but there's a small problem stopping us from sparring. What's that? Or are you too craven to admit you won't be able to beat me? The eldest Sand Snake was confident in her abilities in combat, and Rhaenys had seen her prove her confidence true. All the Stark woman did was just look down at her tummy and then look back at her with a raised eyebrow. Sir Arthur stifled a snort of amusement when the Sand Snakes realized what that problem was. Ugun giggled but stopped when Rhaenys threw a glare at him. You're still a stupid northerner, Nia said, coming to his sister's side. Even if you could fight, you wouldn't be able to beat a Dornishman, or a Dornish woman, Tyee added, with Sarella nodding in agreement. Sir Arthur looked he was about to say something again, but the Stark woman just placed a hand on his arm and shook her head slightly. I can speak for myself, Arthur, she told him, neglecting to use his title. And what makes Dorne so special? She asked. The Sand Snakes. We're the only kingdom the Targaryens didn't conquer. When they came charging in, we hid away and let them sweat beneath the sun before they finally gave up. Obara boasted proudly. Rogias felt proud of that too, even though she was technically a Targaryen. And you would be wrong. The Targaryens did conquer Drone, she told them, spoiling it for them. No, they didn't, Salara protested. All the Stark woman did was look at the Sand Snake. And what was the young dragon famous for? To be fair, Your Highness, King Daenerys and I couldn't hold Dorne. Once they rose in rebellion, he died trying to put them down. Sir Arthur told her from where he stood beside her. He brought them to their knees. If only for 4 years, they were conquered, she replied. But there was one kingdom the Targaryens never actually conquest, the North. You're just saying that because you're from the North, Rhaenys told her, drawing the attention to her. Did Aegon the Conqueror put any northerner to the sword during the War of Conquest? Did he ever defeat a northern army? Did he or either of his sisters set a foot on or flown a dragon over northern lands when they were bringing the 7 kingdoms under Targaryen rule? She asked back. No, that's because they surrendered in the Riverlands, like cravens, Obara said, haughtily. You're right, they did surrender, the Stark woman told her, surprising everyone with the exception of Sir Arthur. And by doing so, they ensured that their lands were never burned, their people weren't killed, and their women were not raped. On the other hand, the Targaryens were never shown the full might of the North. Everyone just stared at her when she was done speaking. They couldn't refute what she had just said, because they all realized that it was the truth. The North had never really been conquered by the Targaryens. Drone still threw those dragons out, Tyee said defiantly, looking like she was sulking. The Stark woman frowned when she heard that. And do they tell you, children of Drone, how your rebellion against the young dragon began? She asked. Sir Arthur looked at her sharply, but everyone else shook their heads after thinking it over. When Daenerys was at that age to be fostered, his father sent him to Winterfell, just as he had been sent. There, he struck up a friendship with one of the younger sons of Cregan Stark, as they were about the same age. When he was crowned and conquered Dorne, he placed his friend in power to rule. A northerner trying to rule Dorne asked Obara. That would be no easy task. And Jon Stark knew that. He had even suggested someone more experienced than he to rule Dorne. But the king would not have it, the Stark woman said, continuing the story. So he surrounded himself with good advisors and tried to rule Dorne with their help. He learned about the customs and culture of the Ronair, about the 3 different types of Dornishmen. Anything and everything that would help him rule the kingdom, he had been given charge of. He treated the people there, the same way he saw his father treat his own, with respect and honor. He grew to care for and respect Dorne, even when the Dornish claimed they did not want him there. When a Dornish noble tried to be insulting and called him a Gerald Shackle, he changed the colors of his banner to a brown, dire wolf on a field of sand and called himself the Desert Wolf. Rosier Knives had never heard this story before, so she was riveted to what the Stark woman was saying. And while there were rebels always showing themselves and then disappearing when he would investigate, he would never take his failures on the local lords. He would treat them with respect and gratitude, never sleeping in their own bed. 4 years of peace he gave in Dorne, and at the end of those 4 years, he had planned to marry a Dornish wife. Resentment for being conquered was calming, and it was hopeful that things would be more peaceful once he married. A bittersweet smile appeared on her face, but there were a few Dornishmen who didn't want peace, who wanted Dorne to be independent. Among these few were a few of the lesser Martell branches, and even a nephew to the ruling Prince of Dorne, who had claimed to be a friend of Jon Stark. And so, on the week the Desert Wolf was to be wedded, they told him of a supposed rebel location, led him there, and plunged a spear into his back. They left him there to die in the desert, not even giving him the decency of having his bones sent back to Winterfell. Thus did the rebellion of Dorne begin and claim the lives of the Desert Wolf and the young dragon. They all just stared at her in shocked silence. They had been taught about how Dorne fought back against the young dragon, but they never knew how. What the Stark woman said couldn't have been true. "You're lying," Sorella shouted, pointing a little accusing finger at her. She only shook her head. "I am not." And peace was made, and Baelor the Crazed arranged the marriage of his nephew to Princess Miriah Martell. The North was angered and insulted. A Stark had tried to bring peace to Dorne, only to be killed, and now the new king was marrying one of them to his own blood. It only grew when the princess, during the wedding feast, where there was a delegation of Northmen attending, had called the Desert Wolf a foolish northerner who had no place in Dorne and was barely better than a wilding barbarian. The northerners left for home, after that, and declared that if the dragons were going to make friends of snakes, they would not have the friendship of the wolves. Since then, the North has not taken part in any war the Targaryens might have waged. Aegon had hopped down from his chair, and before Rhaenys could stop him, toddled over to the Stark woman. "Is Mother sad and angry?" he asked, looking up at her. She looked down at him and smiled. "No, little dragon, I'm not sad or angry, and Baelor did one good thing, out all of that." Those who had killed the Desert Wolf were sent to the Wall and forced to join the Night's Watch, of which Jon's older brother was the Lord Commander. The North has it on very good authority that the murderers were despised, the rest of the Watch, even other Dornishmen who were there. There's a story about how they died. "What's the story?" Nymeria asked. Rhaenys gave her a look of betrayal. It wasn't enough that the Stark woman seemed to be able to intimidate anyone she set her gaze on. She could also charm people to her side, and what made it worse was that she didn't even seem to be trying to charm them. Rhaenys could see it happening to everyone in Sunspear already. They were being charmed from the woman from the North, and it looked like her cousins were being charmed as well. It says that on the day they were to start the journey to the Wall, a brown wolf was sitting nearby on a field of sand, watching them, she began. Every night they camped, the wolf was near, always watching them, yet never approaching them. When they got to the Wall, the wolf disappeared. The murderers joined the Night's Watch and became rangers. But even though their crimes were supposedly forgiven, the Watch kept sending them out beyond the Wall so they could die. One by one, they died until the Martell nephew was left. On the day he did die beyond the Wall, his hair turned white from age and snow. He was shivering on a snowbank, the cold taking his life slowly. All he could see around was the white of the blizzard, but then that brown wolf appeared again. Only as it came closer to him, the winds of the blizzard seemed to strip the color from its fur, and it seemed to grow bigger with each step. When it finally stopped a few inches before him, it was no longer a brown wolf, but a gray dire wolf standing before him on a field of white. A chill had gone down Rhaenys' spine after listening to that, and she was certain that she was not the only one who got it. "What happened next?" Taichian asked her. The Stark woman just smiled. "What do you think happened, little snake?" she asked back. When no one answered her, she bade them farewell and left with Sir Arthur following her. They all watched as she disappeared from sight. "That wasn't like any story I've heard before," Sorella admitted after a moment of silence. Aegon giggled when he heard that. "Mother always tells the best stories," he told his cousin. "They always make you scared." Whatever had silenced Rhaenys disappeared when she heard that. "She's not your mother, Aegon," she told him. He turned to face her. Yes, she is, he said to her, like it was the most obvious thing. No, she's not. Yes, she is. Father married her, so that makes her mother. Normally, no one could argue against child logic like that, but his sister was not in the mood to be beaten on this. She is not your mother again, she repeated herself. Why couldn't he see that? It was obvious to her. Yes, she is, he repeated himself, sounding stubborn. No, she isn't. Your mother was actually a Martell. Not her. She couldn't say the Stark woman's name. She is too. She is mother, he shouted at her, becoming angry. She is not, you stupid little boy. She didn't know how he appeared before her. She had probably walked up to him. All she knew was that she was angry at her little brother who had forgotten about their mother. Before she knew what she was really doing, she had swung her hand and slapped Aegon across the face. The sound of her hand hitting his cheek filled the air. Everyone just stared at her in shock and stunned, surprised. Aegon looked up at her, with tears in his eyes, a red handprint already forming on his small cheek. Before anyone could say anything, she turned and fled. She ran to her chambers and slammed the door behind her. She stayed there the entire day, refusing to see anyone who knocked on her door. It went through the night, and well into the next day. Around midday, the door to her chambers opened, and she looked to see the Stark woman enter. What are you doing in here? She snapped at the Stark woman. You've been in here for the past 2 days. I just came in to check on you, she answered, sitting carefully on the bed next to her. I don't want you to be here. Go away back to the north. Go back to the north and stay there. I don't want you near my family. You aren't my mother. You will never be my mother, and you're making everyone forget about her. She said it with all the hate she could muster at the Stark woman while still not looking at her. Instead, she buried her head in the pillow in front of her. But all she got was silence at first. Rosianes, since I married your father and came to live in King's Landing, have I ever told or asked you to call me mother? The Stark woman finally asked her. She looked up from her pillow. Now that she thought about it, the Stark woman was right. Not once had she been forced to call the Stark woman mother. But she didn't understand the point of that question. Do you know the first thing I did when we came here to Sunspear? The Stark woman asked. No. I asked your Uncle Doran to take me to the crypts beneath the castle, and when I was there, I placed a short spear on your mother's tomb. In the north, the dead are buried with a weapon of iron to prevent their spirits from being haunted by vengeful spirits. The Starks favor the longsword, but I thought it was only fitting that I give her a spear, since it was on the Martell sigil. She looked the girl in the eye. You say that I make everyone forget your mother, but I can't and I won't. How could you have known her? Ramsay demanded. She did come to the north with your father. In the few days she spent at Winterfell before she died, she spent them with me. She told me of how beautiful Dorne was, about how the water gardens were filled with the laughter of children. She told me about to act like a lady in court, even when I did not want to be one, and I don't think I was a good student. And she told me about you. A sad smile appeared on her face. When she gave birth to Akon, I was there to help. I carried him to her so that she could hold him, while Rogar was sent for. She told me to take care of you when she was gone. I think she knew before anyone else that I would marry Rogar before anyone else. I made sure that I would do what she wanted me to do. That was why we came to Sunspear. For you. What? I noticed that you seemed lonely, and I told Rocker that perhaps it might be best if some of your family came to stay. We came to convince Oberyn to let the Sand Snakes to come to King's Landing so you wouldn't be alone. I'm sure that the Red Viper wouldn't want his sister's daughter to be alone. All this speaking of her mother made tears start to form in her eyes. I miss her, she admitted quietly. So do I, the Stark woman admitted as well. That was surprising to hear. How could you miss her? I lost my mother soon after my little brother had been born. To me, Alia Martell was the mother figure I needed, and the lady I never could be. Every time it feels like I made a mistake, I wish she was here so she could show me how to do it right. She looked at Rhaenys. Believe me when I say that, if I could, I would bring her back so she could talk to you. Rhaenys couldn't the tears back anymore. She reached out and held onto the Stark, onto Lyanna. Her father's new wife didn't push her away. She just rearranged her grip gently and let her hold on while she wept quietly. It was only 2 weeks later that Lyanna went into labor one night. During those weeks, Rhaenys had let go of her hate for Lyanna and was charmed by her, which she reminded her with a small smile. And it seemed like Oberyn was as well, seeing that he agreed to let the Sand Snakes to come to King's Landing once they leave. When Lyanna didn't show for dinner one night, And then a maester arrived and told her father that his wife's water had broken. Father all but raced out of the hall. Both she and Aegean, whom she had said sorry to after leaving her chambers with Lyanna, didn't really know what was going. She knew that she was all but sleepless all through the night, and even when she had awoken, there was still no news. It was only in the early afternoon that Hata had come to collect her and Aegean. He led the two of them to the chambers where they had put Lyanna and stood outside as a guard, alongside Sir Arthur. Both Rhaenys and Aegon walked into the room. Aegon holding his sister's hand where they found a tired-looking Lyanna in the bed with father sitting nearby. "Come here, you two," Lyanna said when she noticed that they were there. "Come and meet your new brother and sister." She was holding 2 bundles of clothes in her arms. When both she and Akan carefully climbed onto the bed so they could see, they saw that the 2 bundles had babies inside them. "Who's who?" Akan asked, as he looked at both of the babes, unable to tell the difference. Rosier gently took the babe in Lyanna's left arm and held it so they could see. "This is Visenya, your younger sister," he told them. The babe that looked up at them looked like Akan, with tufts of silver gold hair and purple eyes. She was also squirming around a little, looking like she had energy in her. "And this is your youngest brother," Lyanna told them, showing them the other babe. While their sister showed that she was of Valyria, their brother was obviously of the north. He had dark brown hair and eyes that were so gray they almost looked black in a certain light. While his twin had squirmed, he had remained still, watching them all silently. "What's his name?" Rosier asked. Father was about to speak when Lyanna whipped her head over at him. "We're not naming him Orys," she told him with a growl in her voice. Rhaenys knew that the name Orys had something to do with their house and House Baratheon, but she couldn't think of it, was exactly at that moment. "I'll let you get away with naming our daughter Visenya. But that's it." Her father did not argue the point. "Then what shall we call him?" he asked her with a small smile on his face. She looked back down at her son and smiled. "Jon," she declared. "His name will be Jon Targaryen." When she heard that, Rhaenys thought that was appropriate, thinking of the desert wolf. Thinking. Location, the north. "In the name of Varys of the house Targaryen, the second of his name, king of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the first men, lord of the 7 kingdoms and protector of the realm, I, Rhaegar of the house Targaryen, prince of Dragonstone, sentence you to die." The crown prince lifted Blackfyre, one of the swords of his family, off of the ground, and with one stroke, beheaded the deserter of the Night's Watch. Oberyn stood next to Eddard, Brandon, and Benjen Stark, watching silently. By Brandon's side was Aegon and Rhaenys, and they were watching just as silently. They had only been in the north and at Winterfell for barely a week, when the summons came. As the new lord of Winterfell, it was Eddard's duty to do this, but Rhaegar convinced him to let him do it. This was not their original reason for coming to the north, though, before the journey, the Lady Lyanna had received a raven from her brother, telling her that their father was dying and did not have long left. Wasting no time, both the prince and princess set out to Winterfell, with their children 4 knights of the Kingsguard, Brandon, Ser Barristan the Bold, Ser Arthur Dayan, and Jaime Lannister, known affectionately as Ser Cub amongst the royal family and Kingsguard, due to how young he is, and a small number of knights, soldiers, and anyone who joined them on the road, such as Brynden Tully, the Blackfish. He had come along for 3 reasons. The first was because since his niece was going, his daughters were going as well. Ever since the new wife of Prince Rhaegar had convinced him and Doran to send them with the royal party once they left, so Rhaenys could be around family, he kept an eye on them whenever he was near, just to be sure they weren't causing any trouble. He loved his daughters. There was no mistake about that. Even Cersei loved them, but it had taken a bit before she treated them with cold courtesy. They were so admired by their younger sisters and brother that they wanted to call themselves the Sand Lions to be like their older siblings. That had been a long argument, and it only ended when his younger children sullenly agreed to go with Desert Lions instead. The second reason was because he was interested to see the land where Princess Lyanna came from. Within the few short years she had been in the South, she had somehow managed to charm everyone she talked to with her bluntness and honesty. The first month she spent in the Red Keep wasn't spending her days sewing and gossiping with the other ladies. She spent it learning how things worked in the castle, how what went where, what was coming out of the kitchens, who was being trained in the yard, just the general small things that made the Red Keep work. When she was asked about why she was doing that, she told them about an old northern saying used by women: "He rules the land, you rule the castle." His sand snakes had disliked at her at first, but that changed when they came running to him and demanded to know if the story of the desert wolf was true. He grimaced at the memory of when he told them that it was indeed true. It had not been a bright chapter for Dorne, and House Martell had always considered it to be one of its greatest shames, even more so for him because he shared a name with the Martell nephew. It had come to haunt the Seven Kingdoms during the First Blackfire Rebellion. When Diron the Fool sent out ravens for loyal houses to take up arms, the North had stayed silent. After he had told them that it was true, they began to slowly see her differently, as had his nieces. He almost hadn't fallen to her until he saw her tending to her children, and he realized that she was just like Elia. The third reason was one he kept to himself. No one knew of it. Not even his own brother, because if he could, he would go find the ghost of the North, confront him, and possibly kill him. He remembered the princess's threat and the story of House Bolton all too well, but he could never let go of his need to extract vengeance for his sister. Once the execution was done, everyone went back to their horses. As Oberyn made sure his saddle was secured, he saw Rhaegor and Eddard talking with Rhaenys and Aegon. Normally, only boys were supposed to watch this sort of thing, but his niece had claimed that she would not flinch or look away if brought along, and to her credit, she didn't. He didn't pay attention to what they were saying, only catching about how the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. He just focused on making sure he wouldn't fall off his horse. The ride back to Winterfell was long and quiet. While he was not at the head of the column, he was near enough to see who was leading the group. It was the Stark brothers and the Prince of Dragonstone. The brothers were a study in contrast of clothes. Brandon was of the Kingsguard, so it was necessary for him to dress in white. The youngest, Benjen, had joined the Night's Watch when he was finally allowed to, by his father, and thus he was dressed in black. The middle brother, and now Lord of Winterfell, was dressed in a somber gray, but all of their Stark faces had the same grim look as they rode. He knew that the Starks were close, as both Princess Lyanna and Brandon hugged Eddard almost as soon as they came into the courtyard. Benjen had come in that same night with a few men of the Watch, and the four of them had spent time alone at a table in the Great Hall, musing about how they had changed from what they were at Harrenhal. Brandon was a white wolf instead of a wild one. Eddard was a gray wolf rather than a quiet wolf, and Benjen was a pup, no more. He was a black wolf. Ironically, when Lyanna wondered what she was, all three of her brothers replied with, she-wolf. The grimness on their faces faded as Winterfell came into view. Oberyn may consider Sunspear to be one of the finest cities in Westeros, but he could admit that there was just something about Winterfell. He wasn't sure what it was, he just knew it was something. Maybe Doran would be able to put whatever it was into words. They rode into the courtyard, where Princess Lyanna was waiting for them. "How are you?" she asked both Aegon and Rhaenys, when they dismounted. "We're fine," Aegon told her, his voice calm but a little unsteady. She smiled a little at those words. "That's good to know." She turned her attention to him, and the smile became a sly smirk. "How did you find the northern countryside, Prince Oberyn?" she called out to him. He looked over at her from where he had dismounted. "Aside from the grim purpose we set out for, it wasn't too bad," he answered. "The only problem was the fact it was too damn cold." The smirk turned into a full grin. "Cold? I assure you, Prince Oberyn, it's quite mild here. You should try the north when it's actually winter." "You've been waiting since dawn to use that against me, haven't you?" he asked her. She just grinned wider. "She got you, Uncle Oberyn?" Aegon said, with a grin that was just as big. "I can see that." All of a sudden, a small red-headed boy raced out to the courtyard. Following him was a young girl with the silver-gold hair of the Targaryens, along with Tyae and Sarella. "Father, we don't know where Jon is," the small boy said to Eddard. "What do you mean by that, Edwyle?" Eddard asked his son. "We can't find him," Princess Visenya, Lyanna's daughter and Prince Jon's twin sister, cried out in frustration. She was the elder of the twins and had the look of her father, but behaved like her mother, already wanting to be a warrior. Prince Jon, on the other hand, acted like his father and looked like his mother. As Oberyn listened to those words, he looked over at the two sand snakes there. "Father, we've been looking all over for him. I swear to the seven," Tyae told him once she saw the look in his eyes. "How long since you've last seen him?" Lyanna demanded. Since there were still noble families coming to Winterfell to mourn Lord Rickard, she was helping Lady Catelyn with the preparations and hadn't paid attention to her children. "Last night at supper, after we went to bed," Shirella answered quickly. She might like the Wolf Princess, as some of the courtiers might call her, but Oberyn knew she didn't want to be on the receiving end of her anger. When he didn't come down to breakfast, We had thought he was just sleeping in a little. And you didn't go check on him. Well, she might jape about she gave birth to her brother. It was clear to all that the princess loved her son. Probably a little more so than the other children of the royal family. Lyanna, he will be found, Riker said to his wife, going over to her. We just need to look. Then we'd better. The entire castle turned into a flurry of activity, trying to find the prince. It was not an easy task, as Winterfell was a large castle, and when he was in the Red Keep, Jon tended to be quiet and stayed out of the way. If he wasn't careful, people would assume he was a servant, and the Red Viper had seen this happen more than once, and had a hard time controlling his laugher. But because of his quietness, he would sometimes disappear from people's sight. This was never a problem in the Red Keep, where he was always found soon enough. But since the men who came with the royal family, save for Brandon, didn't really know Winterfell, the search was much harder. It lasted all day, with no success, making Lyanna more agitated. The Stark brothers were agitated as well, but she was visibly showing it. By the time the sun had begun to set, there was still no sign of the prince. They kept searching, but there was no luck in finding him. The royal family was in the Great Hall alongside Eddard Stark and his wife, listening to what the searchers reported. What they all basically said was that they still couldn't find the prince. After an hour, Princess Lyanna had a look on her face that was equal parts anger, fear, and annoyance. A look that was echoed by the rest of the royal children. Where in the name of the warrior could he be? Visenya demanded after the last person left the hall to search for him. There was annoyance in her voice, but also worry. Oberyn knew why she sounded like that. Due to the fact that he was the youngest, Jon was babied a little by his siblings, Aegon less so than his sisters. He is around, Your Highness, he told her from where he sat, trying to make sure he did not make things worse. When I was young, I used to drive Nya crazy by disappearing from her sight and the sight of others in the water gardens for hours on end. Prince Oberyn, you knew the water gardens. Jon doesn't know Winterfell, she told him. Now that, I am not sure of, he thought to himself. Out of the 4 royal children who had lived in the south until now, only Jon seemed to adapt to everything that was here. When his sisters and brother had complained about the cold and the snow, he didn't seem to notice he would spend more time outside than they did. He also was more prone to explore the castle. Before anyone could say anything else, the doors to the Great Hall opened up, and the very prince they were speaking of walked in, past servants and nobles who looked relieved to see him. Everyone stayed silent as Rhaegar spoke. Jon, where have you been? You've been gone since last night, you had everyone worried. His son looked down at the floor. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I wanted to see the Godswood after dinner, so I snuck out of my chambers to go there. But I think I went the wrong way, because there wasn't any heart tree in the woods. When I got sleepy, I slept beneath a big tree. Lyanna stood up as well. You were in the Wolfswood during the night? She asked her son. Yes, mother, he answered, still looking down at the floor. I'm sorry, I wanted to come back, but I didn't know which to go in the dark. And when I woke up in the morning, I still didn't know where to go. He lifted his head away from the floor to look at his parents, but when I woke up, there was a dirty man standing by the tree. That was not something one would normally hear when someone was being described. A dirty man, repeated Rodier. To Oberyn's confusion, he and the 4 Starks there were sharing looks with one another, looks that were full of knowing. Seemingly unaware of the looks, Jon nodded. Yes, he was covered in a cloak that was completely dirty and I could barely see his face. He told me to get up and follow him. We walked for the rest of the day and he led me back to Winterfell. But when I came through the gate and looked back, he was gone. Lyanna kept her gaze on him and he could not look away. Is that all that happened? Jon, she asked him. He stayed silent for only a second before speaking again. No, the dirty man and I weren't alone when he took me back and I didn't come back in alone. He turned back to the doors and opened one of them. What came in the hall shocked everyone there. 7 fucking hells, someone shouted, and Oberyn was inclined to agree with the sentiment. He had already leapt to his feet and grabbed a spear. His daughters had leapt up as well and had a hold on their weapons too. Jon, get away from it, Sorella ordered him, already having an arrow knocked and ready to be shot. It's okay, he shouted, waving his hands in the air. She's nice, she won't bite anyone, I promise. The dirty man told me to make sure that she got to the Grey Stark. Had he not heard the Starks discussing themselves that one night, he would have been as confused as some of the people there. But he had, and he knew which Stark was called out. So did the Stark in question, as Lord Eddard stood up from his seat, walked down the steps, and stood before the direwolf. No one said a word as the two wolves stared each other in the eyes. It was a contest of dominance, and it would only end in one of two ways. One of those ends was realized when the direwolf padded forward, sat down, and laid her muzzle against his boots. Everyone there breathed a sigh of relief at that. 3 nights later, all the lords of the north had come to Winterfell and attended Lord Rickard's funeral. But while the funeral was solemn, the feast that night was anything but. In fact, it seemed like a celebration of life, not death. "You Northerners are quite a rowdy lot," Oberyn told Brandon as they watched the feast go on. Both Brandon and Jaime stood behind him as well as the royal family, of whom he sat next to. "Rowdy? This is quite calm," the White Wolf replied. "So far, not a single fight has broken out." "I would hate to see the northern idea of a rowdy feast," Jaime remarked. And his eyes narrowed as he looked at the crowd. "What's the matter, Sir Cub?" Visenya asked him, having seen his narrowed eyes. Her question drew the looks of her parents, and the Lord and Lady Stark. The direwolf lay behind the chair of Lord Stark. In the 3 days she had been in Winterfell, the Red Viper had yet to see her from Lord Edge's side. "That man over there, sitting with the Umbers, I recognize that sigil," he said, gesturing to the man in question. When Oberyn took a closer look, he found it was more apt to call him lad than man. He was young and could be mistaken for an adult because of his height. 3 dogs on a field of yellow, that's the sigil of House Clegane, a knightly house from the Westerlands. That would be Sandor Clegane. Greyjohn Umber's squire, Eddard answered him once he recognized the lad. "What is he doing here in the north? House Clegane wouldn't have been able to send him to Foster. They don't know House Umber well enough to do so." "That would be because of Greyjohn's uncle, Hother, a maester of the Citadel. He was sent to serve House Clegane, and the story of what happened there is well known in the north," he explained. During his time of service at Clegane's keep, Hother came upon the 2 sons of Clegane. The elder, Gregor, was trying to put his little brother's head in a hot brazier. Bursting into the room, he demanded what was going on, but Gregor said nothing, and Sandor couldn't say anything. So he acted and buried his fist in Gregor's face, surprising the boy and making let go of Sandor. He managed to take Sandor away and get the whole story. He went to their father and told him the story of how Gregor tried to burn his little brother because of a toy. Their father sat and listened, and when Hother was done, they talked. The head of House Clegane, he admitted to being weary of his firstborn and feared that this would not be the last time something like that would happen. So, Hother offered to send Sandor to foster at Last Horse, away from his brother. Sandor's father heartily agreed, and Sandor was sent north Hother within the week. He's been living there ever since. "Is he any good?" Brandon asked his brother. Oberyn knew that tone of voice and question, having used it on his own brother when they were discussing people. It was a question that asked about a person's skills with the martial arts. Lord Eddard knew the question as well. "From what Great John has told me, the lad is quite skilled with a sword and lance, though I am not sure whether he is boasting or not. I have seen the lad on the field, and he is well trained with a sword. He might well be on your level of skill, Brandon." Sounds like we might have a Kingsguard in the making," the White Wolf declared. "Not if I get him on the wall first," the Black Wolf retorted. Despite what he said, both brothers had grins on their faces. The music started up and everyone began to dance. Both Rhaegar and Lyanna stood up to dance, as well as other lords and ladies. Oberyn was about to stand to find a dancing partner when he saw Lady Catelyn approach Brandon. "Lord Brandon, would you do me the honor of this dance?" she asked. Brandon looked nervous for a few moments, and then he nodded. "I would gladly do so, Lady Catelyn." He placed down his shield and offered her an arm, which she took. Oberyn watched in silence as the two of them began to dance. He knew of how they were supposed to marry before Brandon joined the Kingsguard. He had seen how they acted with one another before tonight, always with polite yet awkward courtesy. Perhaps this is the first attempt to fix the problem they have, he mused to himself as he finally stood up from his chair. He danced with each of his daughters, even Elbara, who was uncomfortable with things like this, and he found it to be quite enjoyable to dance with each of them. He even danced with some of the northern ladies. He found himself enjoying the songs and dances they did, and he found himself enjoying the night itself. But the night could not last. The doors to the great hall burst open, and a man who was obviously a messenger, Prince Rhaegar, he called out, silencing the music and making the people go still. "Prince Rhaegar, I bring news from King's Landing." "What is this news?" Rhaegar asked, standing up from his seat. King's Landing has been taken over, and King Eros has been imprisoned by Robert Baratheon. He's calling himself King Robert now. That got the attention of the people in the Great Hall. What of the other Kingsguard? Sir Barristan demanded. What of the Queen and Prince Viserys? Robert has claimed to kill the Kingsguard in combat as well as the Queen and Prince. And when his parents protested what he had done, he had killed them too. He gave them to the fires. Fires? Repeated Oberyn. A red woman sits by his ear, whispering to him. She's converted him to some foreign religion, and his parents were sacrifices. What he said brought horrified whispers to all who had heard that. To slay your own kin was one of the most heinous crimes beneath the sight of the gods. But to burn them alive was even worse. What of the king's hand? Lyanna asked. Everyone knew she was talking of Jon Arryn. When Tywin Lannister resigned his hand after Jaime had joined the Kingsguard, the king had asked the Lord of the Vale to take on the job, which he had done rather well. The messenger shook his head. He was given to the fires too. What does Robert want? Rhaegar asked him. I doubt that he would send you here just to announce his reign. No, your highness, he agreed. He does send orders, but to the Lord of Winterfell, he turned to Eddard. Lord Stark, he commands you to put the prince and his children to the sword and bring his bride to King's Landing. His bride, repeated Eddard. Your sister, the Lady Lyanna, he clarified. He has said that he is willing to overlook the fact that she was defiled by dragon spawn, so long as she lets them be killed. He is talking about my children, she growled. If he thinks that I will go to me with my children murdered, he will find me with a blade on the wedding night. That got a chorus of agreements from the Northmen. If that fucking stag thinks to command us to kill children, he will be damn wrong about that. The Great John declared, standing up from his chair and walking forward. And we're not going to let him call himself king. We still have a dragon. He drew his sword and knelt before Rhaegar. Hail, King Rhaegar! Every lord and some ladies who carried a sword there drew it and knelt before the Prince of Dragonstone, their voices rising in a chant. Hail, King Rhaegar! Hail, King Rhaegar! Hail, King Rhaegar! Hail, King Wrecker! While the feast last night had led to proclaiming a new king, the day was spent in planning a war. The new king, along with the northern lords and the remaining Kingsguard, occupied the Great Hall, discussing tactics, strategies, and logistics. The question of whether the other kingdoms would remain loyal to the dragon or not. Oberyn stood off to the side near the doors of the Great Hall. He knew that he was a noble and could participate in the council, but he was of Dorne and could not offer anything of value to them. His daughters were keeping watch over the royal children as well as the children of Lord Eddard. He stood there in silence, watching as the other nobles argued over what could be done in regards to marching south. You do not join the council. How interesting. A voice that sounded full of rust said quietly besides him. He turned his head and saw a cloaked man whose cloak was completely filthy, and even though he had never seen him before, he knew who this was. You are the ghost of the North, he said, in a voice that choked with anger and grief. You murdered my sister. Yes and no. I did not kill Alvial Martell. I simply gave her a gentler death, the ghost said. A gentler death, he repeated. She could have lived had she stayed in the south. No, she would have died all the same, and her death would be more painful and horror-filled. The cloaked man turned his head and looked the Red Viper directly in the eyes. She would have been raped while the blood of her son was still fresh on the hands of her rapist. In turn, you would have been killed trying to avenge her death and failing to do so, which would have led your daughters to do the same. So be glad that she died the way she did. You don't know that, Oberyn replied after a moment of silence. It was the only thing he could say, because the ghost was right. If Axley had died in the way he suggested, there would have been nothing save for his brother that would stop him from trying to exact revenge. Your sister said the exact same thing when I told her what was going to happen. Right now, the difference between the two of you is that she accepted it. You should too, lest you end putting yourself in an early grave. Is that a threat? He demanded. No, only a suggestion, the ghost replied. It was the last thing he said to him, striding forward now to the council. As he watched him walk forward, he realized that he could not find it in himself to actually try and kill the ghost. It was Lord Eddard who recognized that the cloaked man was there first, standing up from his seat. The other lords quickly followed suit once they realized he was there. Even Rhaegar stood up. We meet again, the new king said to the ghost. Aye, that we have, the ghost replied shortly. But now you are a king, and you plan to retake your inheritance. I would say things are quite different from when we last met. He looked at the rest of the lords there, So, you plan to march south and dethrone the newly crowned stag, is that? Do you plan to stop us? The Great John asked him. If it had been another man, Oberyn, the head of House Umber, would have demanded instead of asked. But it was clear that the ghost held the respect of all the lords there. Of course not, he replied. In fact, I plan to help. How would you help? Rosier asked him cautiously. He grinned, showing his missing teeth. By giving you something that you had thought lost. Outside of the Great Hall, they heard screams and shouts of surprise and fear. But there was a sound over the screams and shouts, a sound that was growing and multiplying. They were not sure what was going, but the king had a look of hope and longing. Is that... He could not finish the question. Did you think I would let them all go back south? The ghost asked him in return, the grin still on his face.